All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to grab the rope and jump right into one of the biggest, oldest, and most important power struggles in all of American government: federalism. I mean, this question, it's really at the heart of everything in the American political system. Who's got the power? Is it Washington, D.C., or is it your state capital, in Albany or Sacramento or Austin? Well, the answer, it's not so simple. It's complicated, and that balance of power, it's always shifting. So, to really get a grip on this constant tug of war, we've got to define the game itself, right? And that word is federalism. Now, quick heads up, a lot of people hear federalism and just think federal government, but that's not it. It's really all about the sharing of power, that dynamic between the national government and all the individual state governments. Okay, so the Constitution lays out the basic rules of the game. You've got certain powers that are only for the federal government. Think big stuff, like declaring war. Then, on the other side of the rope, you've got powers that are reserved just for the states, and that's thanks to the 10th Amendment. We're talking about things like local police, schools, hospitals. And then there's the stuff in the middle, powers they both get to have, called concurrent powers. The best example? Taxes. Yeah, if you've ever looked at your paycheck, you've definitely seen that one in action. All right, Section 2. Now, over the last, 200 plus years, the way these powers actually work together has changed a lot. And funny enough, political scientists have a favorite way of explaining it, and it involves cake. Yeah, this balance of power was never, ever set in stone. It's evolved like crazy. See, we started out in the founding era with this really clear separation of powers. But then huge national crises, like the Great Depression in the 1930s, just forced everyone to work together, making things way more intertwined. Fast forward to the 1980s, and you see the pendulum swing all the way back with something called the devolution revolution, which was all about pushing power back to the states. Okay, so let's talk cake. In the beginning, federalism was a layer cake. Super simple. You had a neat federal layer on top, a neat state layer on the bottom. They didn't really mix. That was called dual federalism. But then along comes the Great Depression, and that basically took all the ingredients, threw them in a bowl, and mixed it all up. What you got was cooperative federalism, or what everyone calls marble cake federalism. The lines are all blurry, swirled together. It's much messier. And yeah, the New Deal in the 1930s, that's what really marbled the cake. I mean, for the very first time, the national government stepped in on a massive scale to deal with the economy and social welfare. All of a sudden, you had national and state agencies working hand in hand, sharing money, sharing power, trying to solve these huge national problems. The cake was, you could say, officially marbled. All right, Section 3. So you might be asking, how did the national government get so much pull on their side of the rope? Well, one of the most powerful tools in this whole tug of war has always been money. And that brings us to what's known as fiscal federalism. Fiscal federalism is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's federalism, but driven by money. Basically, the federal government uses grants, big pots of cash, to, let's say, encourage states to get on board with national policies. And yeah, sometimes it's less encouraging and more forcing. So in this fiscal toolbox, there are two main tools you gotta know. First up, you've got categorical grants. The best way to think of these? Puppet strings. The money is for a very specific purpose, and you can bet the federal government is pulling those strings. States don't get much say at all. But then you have block grants. These are more like a big chest of money for a broad purpose, like improved transportation. It gives the states way more flexibility and power to decide how to actually spend it. A really classic and powerful example of these strings attached came during the Civil Rights Movement. See, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said, no more federal money for segregated schools. So if a state wanted that desperately needed education funding from the federal government, they had no choice. They had to comply with federal integration laws. It was an incredibly effective way to enforce a national standard. Okay, but what if the federal government orders the states to do something, but then provides $0 to actually pay for it? What happens then? Well, that's what's called an unfunded mandate. A huge example of this was the No Child Left Behind Act. It demanded all these massive changes in public schools and then just left the states to figure out how to pay the bill. And to put it lightly, as one historian so perfectly said, the states hate that worst of all. You can imagine why. Okay, news section. So when the two sides are digging in their heels and can't agree on the rules of the game, when there's a huge fight over who actually has the power, there's one referee that steps in to make the final call. And that is, of course, the Supreme Court. Time and time again throughout U.S. history, it's these landmark Supreme Court cases that have completely redrawn the lines in the sand. And there are two cases in particular that just perfectly show how the court can yank that rope of power in either direction. So let's check out this showdown. Way back in 1819, you have McCulloch v. Maryland. This case dramatically expanded federal power. It basically said, yep, national laws are supreme, and states, you can't interfere. But then, fast forward more than 170 years to 1995, and you get U.S. v. Lopez, which pulled the rope hard in the other direction. In that one, the court said Congress had gone too far, and it reined in federal power to protect the authority of the states. You know, these huge court battles, they almost always boil down to how you interpret just a few key parts of the Constitution. On one side, you have things like the Supremacy Clause, which just says federal law is supreme, and the Necessary and Proper Clause, which gives Congress a lot of flexibility. Those tend to expand federal power. On the other side, the states have their shield, the 10th Amendment, which reserves powers just for them. And caught right in the middle of this whole tug of war is the Commerce Clause. That one has been at the heart of some of the absolute biggest fights over federal power. And just listen to this warning from the majority opinion in the Lopez case. Chief Justice Rehnquist basically said that if they sided with the federal government here, it would totally erase the line between what's a national issue and what's a local one. He argued it would give Congress a general police power, the exact kind of power the Constitution saves for the states. So at the end of the day, why does any of this matter? I mean, who cares about layer cakes and old court cases? Well, you should, because this tug of war is not just some dusty idea from a textbook. It is happening all around us, right now, and it directly affects your life in a ton of ways. Just think about it. Every time a state legalizes marijuana, that's federalism in action, a state law directly clashing with a federal one. Or remember the COVID-19 pandemic? All those arguments over mask and vaccine mandates? That was a massive federalism debate playing out in real time. Federal guidance versus state control. From what's taught in your local schools to how you vote, this fight over who gets the final say, it's literally everywhere. And look, there are real pros and cons here. On the plus side, this system allows states to be what some people call laboratories of democracy. One state can try a new policy, and if it works, others can adopt it. That's a huge advantage. But the flip side? The disadvantage is that you can end up with this really confusing, sometimes unequal patchwork of laws across the country. The rules can be completely different just by crossing a state line. So here's the bottom line. This game, this great American tug of war, it never ends. That rope is always being pulled, back and forth, back and forth. And that leaves us with the really important question we all have to think about in the 21st century. In this never-ending contest for power, which side should be pulling harder?